Hey there, it's Steve from Serious Keto, and this is the Not So Serious Keto video podcast. I'm going to start out this week with something that I've been getting a lot of requests for, which is a Courtney update. So this week is Courtney's graduation from basic training in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Next week, she is scheduled to head off to Mississippi for her advanced individual training, which will be in carpentry and masonry, which I think is perfect for her. She's a very creative person. She likes doing a lot of craft stuff, and I could really see this as being something that perhaps she moves into as far as a career. Also, and I don't know if any of you care or not, she does, she cares, but she was admitted into the agricultural sciences program at the University of Wisconsin. Who knows, maybe getting into this whole agriculture thing, I can start getting her to help me with my garden. That would be all right. Unfortunately, with the whole COVID thing, we can't go to her graduation. They're just going to do a virtual online graduation. Maybe for the graduation from AIT, we'll be able to go. It sure would be nice if we could make it, because both of Connor's graduations were virtual and we couldn't make it to those as a result. Well, I mean, we made it, but we made it from our living room. So that is the Courtney update. I will be doing a video at some point in May where I talk about the Keto Mojo, and I also talk about the levels program and the continuous glucose monitor that I use. It's going to be partially a review, but also kind of comparing and contrasting when you would use one tool versus the other, and also just sort of learnings that I have had, both on my own and in conversations with the folks from Keto Mojo and from Levels. And I feel, after some of these conversations, that we're at the front end of something really great in terms of people being able to take control of their own metabolic health, to be able to monitor in real time various metabolic markers. I'm really looking forward to doing this video. Another glucose-related video that I'll be doing fairly soon is on the whole tapioca starch and resistant tapioca starch, because I continue to learn more and more about that. And I've had some really great comments, both from sort of a science standpoint, as well as questions from a why don't you test this sort of standpoint, that I feel are going to be good to drill down in. I always feel like whenever I do one of these resistant starch videos, it's not the end, it's the beginning. I'm opening up a door to learning more. So whenever you see one of these videos, understand that I'm learning along with you. It's a learning process. One of the things, though, that slows me down in doing those videos is when I get a bad night of sleep, which is still fairly frequent, my dawn effect, so seeing my blood glucose go up in the morning, is far more dramatic. And I've talked with Tom at Levels, and he said that this is not unusual. It's likely related to cortisol and the stress created by a lack of sleep. So when I get an especially bad night of sleep, which usually means I wake up about 3 hours after I go to bed and then stay awake until about an hour before I should be getting up, my blood glucose at around 7 a.m. is usually in the low 100s. And then it will continue to ramp up until like noon. And this is fasted, mind you. So it'll ramp up, it may get into the 1-teens. I don't think I've ever seen it get up, to 120, but then it comes back down and, by early afternoon, it's stabilized where it ought to be, which is typically low 90s, upper 80s for me. On those nights where I get a good night of sleep, I wake up and I'm sitting in the, mid to upper 80s, maybe low 90s, and that's where I hang out pretty much all day. So long story short, if that's still possible, one of the things that slows me down in doing these sort of resistant starch and blood glucose experiments is I feel I need to have a stable blood glucose where it ought to be, in the upper 80s, low 90s for me, and then I test. And if I'm not there because of a bad night of sleep, I can't test. But hopefully I will have a follow-up video to the resistant tapioca starch video, also some point in May. In the last couple of videos, I talked about ingredient advisors and ultimately kind of came to a point where I said people need to read ingredient labels and then make their own educated decisions. And education is an ongoing process. So there are certainly ingredients that I won't eat because I've learned that these things are bad. There may be ingredients that I do eat currently that at some point I will get enough compelling evidence that tells me I shouldn't eat these things. I also mentioned in the last podcast that I think dose has a lot to do with it. So just because an ingredient is present in a minute amount doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a horrible thing in your body. If you have a small amount every now and then, is it really all that bad? But this also led me to the question of some of these ingredients, things like dextrose, for example. They're on the ingredients list because they're in the product, but is it possible that they were consumed in the making of that product? For example, a lot of keto bread recipes will call for some sugar or some honey. The yeast then feeds on that sugar or that honey and consumes it. So supposedly, zero carb effect, even though you may have a teaspoon of sugar or honey in a loaf of bread. One of the things that I found is a lot of stuff like beef jerky or beef sticks, sausages, charcuterie have dextrose in it. Now, the first thought is, oh my gosh, it's sugar, it's dextrose. How can you be putting that in a beef stick? Well, it's necessary for that to feed the bacteria, which changes the pH and cures that beef stick. That cures that sausage or salami or pepperoni. It would be interesting to have a discussion with a food scientist that really understands this and can explain all of it to me. And fortunately, some of the businesses that I'm starting to work with do have relationships with food scientists. So my hope is that at some point soon, I can have a conversation with a food scientist and ask some of these questions. So let me ask you, if I do get a chance to speak to a food scientist, are there any questions you would have me ask? You just get one, so don't give me a big laundry list, but put it down in the comments down below, and if I do wind up having such a conversation, I'll try and ask that question. Speaking of affiliate partners, I feel like I'm doing a pretty good job here, segueing from one topic to the next. But speaking of affiliate marketing partners, I had a company reach out to me. I'm not going to name them, but they make chips out of eggs. And a number of you have asked me to do a review on their product. They reached out to me and asked if I would like to be an affiliate marketing partner. And I said what I say to everybody. Well, I don't say this to everybody. If I'm interested, I will say, send me a product. I will do a review, an honest review. And if I like it, then we'll have something to talk about. And they sent me back a request for a proposal. So they want me to make a proposal. And then they had me read their style sheet or style guide. This was a 32-page, I think 32-page. It was either 23 or 32, regardless, long. It looked like a PowerPoint presentation that had been converted into a PDF. And it was their guidelines for how I should display their product, how it should appear in thumbnails, how I should show it in a video, things I should say, things I shouldn't say. It just went on and on. And I understand protecting your brand. I've worked for a couple of large corporations. I worked for GE. GE had a style guide, but it was only like 3 pages long. And this was back when GE was like one of the biggest companies in the world. You know, how do you use the GE monogram? How do you use the GE font? Where can you place things? What colors can you use? That was it. But being told that I need to follow a 32 or 23 page guide, I said no. I said, I'm going to pass. That's not me. I'm not real good at being told what to do. And some of you may have figured out the company that I'm talking about. You won't see their product reviewed here, I don't think. And with that, we are going to take a brief little ad break. Maybe. I guess sometimes it doesn't show up for some of you, and like most things in YouTube, I don't know the rhyme or reason behind it, but you're either going to get a little commercial right now, or the screen's just going to go black for about 4 seconds. This part of the podcast may come off as a little bit of a rant. Every time I've sort of rehearsed it in my brain, it has felt very ranty. I'm going to try to make it not especially ranty, but it's hard because it's something that frustrates me an awful lot, and that is keto. I'm to the point where I kind of regret naming this channel Serious Keto, because the keto label, I think, is interpreted or misinterpreted by so many people. So you've got people outside the keto world that look at it as this, I don't know, all we do is eat butter and steak or something. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but for whatever reason, as you look at certain diets, I believe that some have more negative connotations to them, probably because of the media and government and the food pyramid and all of that. You start talking things like Atkins or keto, and there's just something about it that I think people just feel like you're on the express train to a heart attack. Oh my God, you're eating all this fat, you're eating all this junk, it's just horrible for you. So you've got that group of people that really kind of misunderstand or misinterpret or misportray keto. And that's all of our fight to fight, I guess, should we choose. And I think the best way we do it is just through our behavior, through our lifestyle, through showing our improved health, because we have adopted this way of eating. What frustrates me more are the keto people that have such a dogmatic, strict interpretation of what keto is. And it seems that these people like telling other people how to eat. Like there's a set list. Here's what you should eat, here's what you shouldn't eat. They like putting labels on things like dirty keto and lazy keto, or telling you simply you're not keto because you ate such and such an ingredient. I've had viewers tell me that they have seen people kicked out of keto groups on Facebook just because they suggested using Vital Wheat gluten, for example, or some other ingredient that just didn't fit the moderator's strict, narrow view of what keto is. Now, keto isn't like a copyrighted or trademarked or patented sort of name. It's a thing. It's, in my opinion, it is a lifestyle. It's a way of eating. And you can just assume that everything I say here on out, and I guess before, is my opinion. That way I don't have to keep saying, in my opinion. But keto, in my opinion, I just did it, is a way of eating that is nuanced, and I think it is individualistic. I believe that keto is a diet if you've got a list. If you've got a table and there's 2 columns, you can eat this, you can't eat this, then it's a diet. And some people like that. Some people like lists. Some people like having those strict barriers. I can't eat this, I can't eat this, because then they don't have to think about it. And I'm not saying that as an insult. Maybe for some people I am. Maybe some people aren't independent thinkers and don't want to be. But I think for other people, it is easier to purchase food, it's easier to make food, it's easier to just get on with their day because they don't have to spend any, mental energy thinking about what I can and cannot eat. Einstein, for example, always wore the same clothes because he didn't want to waste any brain power on thinking about what he was going to wear that day. So for some people, it does make sense to have specific lists. I can eat this, I can't eat this. I also know that for some people, if they start working their way into that gray area on keto, that could become a bit of a slippery slope for them. Maybe they do have such a strong carb addiction that once they start, they could just completely fall off the wagon. So I do get lists for some people. But for me, keto isn't about a list. It's not, I can eat this, I can't eat that. To me, keto needs to be sensible. And to be sensible, like I said before, it needs to be individualistic. So what do I believe keto is, or sensible keto as I call it? I believe it's avoiding as much garbage processed food, especially carbohydrates, as you can. But really, that's just the means to an end. The end is improved metabolic health. It is the removal of inflammation from your body. It's getting control of your insulin by getting control of your blood glucose. It's about sort of holistically feeling better. So to me, if I can eat something that doesn't spike my blood glucose, that doesn't kick me out of ketosis, that doesn't cause me inflammation, in my opinion, that's keto. And I think there's a risk that is run when we get too rigid on what the standards are for keto, and when we start putting labels on things like dirty and lazy, that we alienate people. We shouldn't be trying to get rid of people from keto because they're not clean keto enough for us. We should be trying to welcome more people in. We should be pitching a bigger tent for keto. That means that keto needs to be sensible for an individual. In order for it to be sensible, it needs to be affordable, it needs to be available, and it needs to be sustainable for that individual. And when people get judgmental of other people who are trying, they want to do keto, they're trying to do it the best they can in terms of what's affordable and available and sustainable for them, and they're told they're doing it wrong, I think some of those people just quit. I think they say, you know what, screw it. I'll go back and enjoy bread and pasta and pizza and all of those things. Yeah, you know, if I'm going to be told that I can't do it right, then why bother? So the reason I bring this up is I believe that for keto to be more mainstream, we need to be more welcoming. And to be more welcoming, we need to respect the choices of our fellow adults that are trying to do keto the best they can. Before I do the final topic of this podcast, which is going to be a fairly serious one, I mean, the keto one was already kind of serious, but this one I think is going to be even a little bit more serious. I'm going to show you last week's Easter egg, which nobody who guessed it guessed incorrectly. It's the Mystery Machine from Scooby-Doo. This, I don't know if this was originally my wife's. It's fairly beat up. Or if it was just Connor or Courtney that beat this thing up. But now Colton is playing with it. And in fact, I actually have the first season or two. I can't remember if the first box set was just season 1 or season 1 and season 2, but of Scooby-Doo. And I think when it was first released, it was called Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? And the first episode came out in 1967. That's before I was born. Crazy. Yet it's still a fun show, and we let Colton watched the first episode. We were a little concerned. We didn't know if it would be too scary or not. Didn't seem to bother him. But that was last week's Easter egg. For the final topic now, it's going to start seeming darker than it winds up being. It's going to end on an upbeat note. So if you feel like I'm going someplace dark, it's okay. We won't be there long. A couple of weeks ago, I had mentioned in my podcast about my neighbor who died of a heart attack. And when something like that happens, it can give you pause. And it should. It should be a time where you reflect on your own life and how you're living it. You also often will find people say that these things come in threes. Of course, if you wait long enough, everything comes in threes. But it came in threes also for me. So earlier this week, I got a message on LinkedIn from a former coworker that we used to have a really tight-knit team at GE. This was over 10 years ago. But we were in the continuous improvement group. There were 6 or 7 of us. You know, one person was part-time. That's why I say 6 or 7. But we were really close. You know, we were a very tight-knit group that just, we had a lot of fun together. And one of the women that was in the group let the rest of us know that another one of the women, her name was Carolyn, had died of cancer last week. And she was also just a wonderful, wonderful person. I never ever heard her say an unkind word about anybody. She was just so kind-hearted and thoughtful and compassionate. Kind of shy, kind of soft-spoken, kind of introverted. So, you know, we had that bond, that introversion bond. And so, yeah, you know, she died. And then yesterday I saw that another guy, he was an older gentleman, but I knew him from Rotary. When we'd have our weekly Rotary Club, very often I would sit at the same table as him. And he passed away. So pretty much bam, bam, bam. I mean, within 2 weeks, 3 people that weren't super duper close to me, but close enough to me to make me sad, passed on. And that forced me into an even deeper sort of introspection. And I asked myself 3 questions. And I'm going to ask you these questions as well. The first question is, if I were to die tomorrow, what would I do? The answer, spend every waking moment enjoying the company of my family. If I were to die next week, what would I do? I would get my affairs in order. I would make sure that my family is able to transition as seamlessly as possible. So, knowing various banking and investment information, knowing where everything is kept in terms of tools, knowing all my passwords, knowing how I pay bills, all of that stuff. Making sure that those are things they don't need to think about if I were gone. Final question is, if I knew I were going to die a year from today, what would I do? And the answer is twofold. First, just savor every moment. Kind of like the if I were going to die tomorrow thing, but stretched out over a year. But also, can I change somebody else's life this year? Can I make somebody else's life better? That's what I would do. So I'd be curious to know, if you feel like getting sort of philosophical and deep with me, what would you do if you knew you were going to die tomorrow, next week, a year from now? And having answered that question, will you actually do those things? That's it for this podcast. Thank you for watching or listening.